Hey there, time travelers! Ready for another nostalgia trip back to the past? Hop in, because in today's video, we are traveling back to a time where ketchup came in multiple colors like neon green and purple. Today, we are turning our channel over to Nickelodeon to take a look at the Wild Thornberrys, specifically their youngest child, Donnie, and how exactly he came to be a part of the Thornberry family. Be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see why it appears that no one can communicate with Donnie despite Eliza being able to speak with both animals and humans. It might not be entirely clear at first, but anyone who has watched the Wild Thornberrys more than a few times will know that Donnie isn't actually a part of the Thornberry family, at least not by blood. Nigel and Marion Thornberry took Donnie in after finding him feral in the forest alone, unaware that his parents had been brutally murdered. For a long time, it was unclear exactly what happened to Donnie's birth parents or who they even were, but thanks to a 4-part straight-to-TV movie that aired in 2001 titled The Wild Thornberrys: The Origin of Donnie, we all learned the dark and depressing truth. Donnie's real parents were named Michael and Lisa, and much like the Thornberrys, they loved nature and wanted to do nothing but study and protect the animals in their natural habitats. They had actually met the Thornberrys once before briefly while on their honeymoon before their untimely demise. Michael and Lisa were primatologists and were currently conducting research in Borneo, and in doing so, they had been spending much time with the orangutans in the area. The family came to know the villagers and the locals in Borneo, and ultimately, they were accepted by everyone and everything that lived there. Even young Donnie managed to form a bond with the orangutans. One night, however, things took a terrible turn when Michael and Lisa had discovered that a group of poachers were in the area and were attempting to capture 2 orangutans, a mother and its child. Being dedicated to animal conservation and wanting to do everything that they could do to protect the orangutans, both of Donnie's parents ended up foiling the poachers' plan and helped the mother orangutan and her child escape being captured. And while this action was heroic and one that the orangutans were likely grateful for, the poachers, on the other hand, were less than happy. Way less. Following their success at saving the orangutan and its baby, Michael and Lisa were sadly ambushed by the poachers that they had just stopped, and the poachers were out for blood. Considering it was a Nickelodeon show, they never actually showed how the poachers did it, but we know that they brutally murdered Donnie's parents. The worst part of it is that they likely murdered them right in front of their child, and the only reason they didn't kill him is that they figured that an animal would do it for them. I'm sure they thought that there would be no way for a child to survive on its own in the wild of Borneo, let alone one young as Donnie. Donnie was then forced to sit there beside the bodies of both of his parents, most likely unaware of what had actually transpired. It was a depressing tale and a horrifying time for the child, who was now left all alone with no one to care of or look after him. What's almost as sad as the fate of Michael and Lisa is the fate of their child, who we knew eventually ended up with the Thornberrys. We just never knew the exact process in which that happened. Not until the origin of Donnie, that is. You see, when Donnie was left an orphan in the middle of the wild, he didn't have any support system, at least not the type that you would expect. We mentioned before that while they were studying and conducting their research on the orangutans, Michael and Lisa had gotten to know the villagers in and around Borneo. Well, we can only assume that for one reason or another, the villagers didn't know about the fates that beheld Donnie's parents, or they couldn't find Donnie after the tragic incident. Either way, there was one hero that stepped in to save the young child, and it was one that no one saw coming. The orangutan mother that had been saved by Michael and Lisa was actually the one that had gotten to know the family fairly well as they were studying its habits and the habits of its child. She stepped up and without a second thought took Donnie in as if he was her own child. It's unclear exactly how long this relationship persisted, but we have to assume that it was at least a year or 2. Considering that we learned that Donnie was currently between the age of 4 and 5 when we saw him in the Wild Thornberrys, and in the origin of Donnie, he appeared to be a baby in the flashback with his birth parents, it's safe to assume that the orangutan had been caring for him since he was no older than 2 years old. Then, when you take a look at the flashback scene where Donnie becomes an adopted member of the Thornberry family, he is at least 3, maybe even close to 4 years old. That means that Donnie had spent at least a full year in the care of the orangutan mother, and for a child as young as 2 years old or maybe even younger, a full year is the equivalent to half of their life or more. In other words, for half of his life, Donnie was raised in the wild by a family of orangutans. That's a lot of time for the child to be away from the humans, especially in those early development stages. The only human interaction that Donnie had before the death of his parents was with his parents and maybe some of the Borneo villagers. But other than that, up until his life with the Thornberrys, he only ever had interactions with the wildlife that became his family, which clearly explains why he became feral. And in that time, Donnie would develop his own language of sorts, or the way of communicating that only he could understand. And let's talk about the heart-wrenching scene where Donnie's orangutan mother chooses to let her human son go and become a part of the human family with the Wild Thornberrys. It is easily one of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire series. As a child, it didn't hit me as hard, but rewatching the origin of Donnie as an adult, it had me in tears. The Thornberrys were a great family for Donnie to end up with when you consider how similar they are to his birth parents. On top of that, he would now have 2 older sisters that could help look after him and help him assimilate into the real world. Actually, let's talk about this for a sec. Specifically, Donnie's integration into the Thornberry family. I don't want to criticize too much on the Thornberrys' adoption process or their parenting skills, but looking back on it, it almost looks like Donnie's life with the Thornberrys, though it was wild, wasn't actually a healthy one. Looking back on it, it almost seems as though the Thornberrys kept Donnie as a pet and saw him more of an animal companion and less than a son. As we pointed out, despite living with the Thornberrys for around a year and a half by the time The Origin of Donnie was released, he still remained feral. There had been seemingly no attempt to help the child integrate into human life so that he could possibly re-enter society. Instead, the family just keeps them with him in their RV as they travel the world and pass off all of his animal-like aspects as him just being quirky. Now, I'm not saying that they should have tried to change Donnie or tame him, but no one makes an attempt to genuinely understand him. Honestly, the orangutan put in far more effort than Nigel and Marion did to raise the boy as their own. What's really interesting is that Donnie actually knows one word in sign language, which he didn't learn from the Thornberrys. No, if he hadn't somehow remembered his birth parents teaching it to the orangutans, Donnie would never know the sign for family. It's also really strange that Eliza can't even understand him, though I can't help but wonder if she ever even tried. I mean, she has the ability to communicate with every animal in the world. This should also include humans if you really think about it. So even if Donnie is speaking some made-up language, Eliza should have had the ability to understand him. So the fact that she couldn't sort of tells me that she didn't even make the effort. She was too busy hanging out with Darwin to be concerned about her adopted brother or to even want to speak with him. And it's kinda interesting the more we dive into the finer details of Donnie and his new family. Not only did the Thornberrys never try to teach the child how to communicate with others or to express himself properly, but they also never bothered to get him situated into actual clothes. Now, you might just assume that Donnie was a free spirit and was the one who actually insisted on himself wearing only loincloth, but what if we told you that it was deeper than that and that the Thornberrys just didn't care enough to give him an actual set of clothes? The main reason that I say this is because of how interested Donnie became in another kid's clothes. Do you remember when the Rugrats did a crossover with the Wild Thornberrys? It was called Rugrats Gone Wild, and it was a ton of fun. And one of the funnier parts of the crossover event was anytime Donnie got to interact with Chucky. The two were polar opposites, and for some reason, Donnie wanted Chucky's clothes, and he wanted them badly. The wild boy ended up stealing Chucky's clothes, and by the end of the crossover, he officially had his first full outfit of clothes. So, if he was the one insisting on not being restrained by real clothing, why would Donnie go out of his way to steal clothes from another child? It's interesting to really pull apart these finer details. To be honest, I think the Thornberry family could have put in more effort into raising Donnie, rather than just continue on with their lives like they have an extra being with them. I mean, they did take him in and feed him, so they have that going for them at least. Maybe Donnie really was just a free spirit that they didn't want to tame, but some of the evidence against the idea is compelling as well. While the Wild Thornberrys was hands down one of the best Nickelodeon shows in the history of the channel, there is no doubting that it had some dark undertones. In this case, Donnie's backstory and his childhood turned out to be a lot more depressing than I remember as a child when I used to watch the show. What do you think though? Did Donnie have it as bad with the Thornberrys as it looks, or do you think that them taking him in was the best thing that could have ever happened to him? Be sure to let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. As for now, that's all, time travelers. Let us know what you think in the comments, and like and subscribe for more time traveling videos.